That sounds like an introduction to the talk I'll be doing from the start of next year once we publish our white paper project. So do keep an eye open for that, because we have been doing a lot of work in Common Weal to try to set out what would we do to develop the case for the next independence referendum. So we spent quite a bit of time today working through that, and early January, leading up to the Scottish Independence Convention conference on the 14th of January, we will publish the first iteration of what we are suggesting should be the white paper on which the next independence campaign is fought. That's for another time. Okay, tonight there's more for me to say than I'll have time to say, so I'm just going to crack on. I will probably stop me once the time is to come to stop, because there's too much on the question of the economy. So I'm just going to go through as much of it as I can, and then once my time's up, you can ask questions on anything that I haven't got to or any of the things I have. And what I'm mainly going to say, mainly going to talk about is economic issues as we stand now. So rather than talking about what we could do after independence, I want to look at the analysis of where we are now, what we can do now, and then you can take a fairly basic assumption that we can double all of that if we had all the powers of an independent country. But I think it's useful in testing to say to ourselves, what are the actions that we can take? It makes you think about now better than if you say, okay, at some point in the future we could. So almost everything I'm going to talk about is doable under the powers that we have in Scotland at the moment. But first, the problem, one of the fundamental problems is there's lots of things I'd like to tell you today, but nobody knows. Nobody knows. Scotland is a data desert. It is a phenomenally unexplored country. We have no basic information about an enormous number of things in Scotland. We do not know what our balance of trade is. We do not know what the balance between what we export and what we import is. We're not even clear on what we export. So if you've heard many times that our number one export market is England, it probably never occurred to you that quite a large chunk of that export is English mortgage payers paying their mortgages to English banks, which are subsidiaries of RBS. So the nameplates in Edinburgh, which means all those mortgage payments appear to be cross-border flows. Except for that's not an export, not in any meaningful sense. So you try and find out what the exports are, it's very difficult. You try and identify the Scottish economists. Now there are economists in Scotland, but you try and find economists who are concentrating or focusing on the Scottish economy. There's a few people in the Fraser Islander Institute, and there are a few people who take an interest in economic development issues in Scotland, but we don't have a lot of economists. Then this is, I think, a fundamental question. Who is Scotland's leading economic commentator? And I'm going to say yes, except commentator as in not a member of a political party arguing from a partisan position. See? Kind of it. Douglas Fraser and Jim McCormick. Douglas Fraser is really a business correspondent. He's not an economist. We don't have a serious commentator. We're a nation without a single serious economic independent commentator with an economics background. That should alarm us. So the first thing that I want to say is we need to gather an awful lot more information about the Scottish economy. I could spend the whole night tonight only talking about the things we don't know about the Scottish economy. And I'm going to say that it is absolutely within the powers of the existing Scottish Government to set up a National Statistics Agency. This is information gathering. It can be done tomorrow. Set up an office, put good statisticians in it. I'm sure that Jim Cuthbert, who was previously the head of statistics at the Scotland office, would help out with that. But this is a major problem. We do not have in this country the infrastructure of a proper nation state when it comes to examining and looking at our economy, and it makes a lot of the rest of it more difficult. Right, then, where I really want to begin is by saying that you cannot fix things if you do not have an analysis of what they are and what's up. So, what is it about the Scottish economy that you would identify as strength or weakness, as areas for development, as problem? We don't discuss this properly. We tend to do everything in sound bites and giveaways. The foundations of the economy are solid, we're growing, blah, 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 blah. Right, that's fine, except what is it then that we're saying about the economy? What is the aim? What is the goal? What is the structure? And I think I'm going to pick 3 major themes for analysis. Things that I'm going to say are ways that we should look at our economy now. Number 1, ownership. Now for the S&P, this should be a very big issue. We have an exceptionally high volume of our economy which is not owned inside our economy. This is really important for a whole host of reasons. If you have your economy owned by overseas corporations, then profits are exported. So as soon as you have large parts of your economy, for example, all your airports owned by Spanish and Chinese firms, all your energy supply, or a large chunk of your energy supply owned by a Spanish corporation, all your high streets dominated by multinational corporations, etc., etc. When you have a high degree of overseas ownership, number 1, you lose you lose profits. They're exported and not recycled. Second of all, they have no commitment to the country, to long-term investment or to staying there. They prioritise low pay, fast turnaround, low margin, high volume. Should I say that again? I'm going to say that again. Right, so what they tend to prioritise is businesses which make small profits on large amounts of sales based on low skills and low productivity. So it's the supermarket model, the retailer model. Rather than saying we will make higher profits on more valuable work in a smaller volume, for example, manufacturing, we will make smaller profits on a larger volume which doesn't involve skills, so we can keep pay and investment low. So far too much of our economy is dominated by industries which are based on building a shed, filling it with Chinese goods, paying kids low salaries to stock the shelves, and trying to persuade you that you haven't bought enough this week. And that's far too much for our economies run like that. But it's not just that. It is, I know of somebody who worked as a public affairs, a lobbyist, and had done some work with a Danish energy company. And he said in private to them, he said, it's amazingly easy to take Scotland's assets. It's amazingly easy for an overseas company to come in here and get the license to develop our wind power. And he wasn't saying that as a compliment. So this is another factor. We have to think about where our economy is owned. And that links into the next thing which we need to say about our economy. I'm not going to say productivity, I'm going to say productiveness. So this is I'm trying to use this as a bigger idea. So this is not just the model of how much value are we squeezing out of each hour of labour in the country, blah, blah, blah. This is the question of how much do we produce, and of that production, what value goes into it. So we have nothing like enough manufacture, nothing like enough production in this country. We import far too much. Most of the West does, or a lot of the West does. The UK's, this problem is absolutely a UK problem. We import far too much and we don't make enough. And I'm going to come back on later on to the point that every time we talk about manufacturing, we always talk about manufacturing as if it's an export industry. We never talk about manufacturing production for domestic consumption. One of the single sharpest and biggest growth opportunities we could have in Scotland is if we made more of what we consume here and imported less cheaply from China. We'll talk about how in a second, hope. So this productivity question is really important because the value, the question you should always ask if you're looking at economy is where is the value created and where is the profit extracted? So if we use the model that we've got just now, the value is actually created in China. So the place where you start with something that becomes worth more at the end of the process is all in China, because that's what manufacturing is. You start with something, you end with something, and the value is created in the labour, the process, the application of labour to technology and labour to raw materials in the oldest possible sense. Now that value is done in low pay places so that the value is taken not by the employee in these economies, but by the company that owns the capital, the materials and so on. So that is all done in another country. Where is the profit extracted? Well, it's you. 100% of the, more or less 100% of the profit of the retail sector comes from your pockets. Do they put more of the profits that come out of your pockets back into the economy than they take out? Well, no, obviously not, because they're profitable. To be profitable, they have to extract more than they put in. So the value is created overseas and the profit is extracted in Scotland. We don't make. When you make, you need skills. Skills are high value, you pay. And that takes me on to the third crucial analysis about the Scottish economy, which is its interconnectedness and the extent to which we manage to sustain not just a business, but a system of business, an ecosystem around businesses. So we have a major problem that an enormous amount of companies cannot manage their supply chain domestically. So they cannot, you can have a company that makes things in Scotland, but the things it needs to make those things it cannot source from Scotland. Now this is exacerbated when your economy is owned overseas. So let me give you an example of how supply chain works. If you buy your sausages from Aldi's Tesco, if somebody breaks Aldi's window or Tesco's window, it will almost certainly be another multinational, which is the service contract, to replace that window. So it'll probably be one of the many service companies that will come and put that window back in. So even if they get their window fixed, we lose the wealth. If you buy your sausages from a local butcher's and their window gets put in, a local joiner will put that window back in. That local joiner will buy their sausages from the shop. If the joiner needs to get some new PowerPoints put in, they will get those put in by a local electrician. And so what you have is a sustained economy. Now, I don't want to go on much longer because I want to get into some solutions and I know time is a wee bit tight here. But what you have is a very uneven economy where you have some absolutely world-leading, first-class, high-tech manufacturers, but they're surrounded by no ecosystem that can supply them or support them. You have lots of small independent producers which are outside a network, an ecosystem which enables them to do the maximum amount of their work with local suppliers or with the indigenous suppliers who they can develop long-term relationships with. And all of these things mean that we lose far too much of the value of our economy overseas into other places. And let me give you an example. Scotland is a very large exporter of potatoes. We send a lot of potatoes out of Scotland. There is not a single crisp making facility in Scotland. You have never ate a crisp that was made in Scotland. So we send our potatoes away to get made into crisps by a multinational who sends them back to us, we buy them again, and you eat the crisps. Now, if you were going to be active, you might say, is there the scope to sustain a crisp making facility in Scotland? How would we go about it? How would we do that? Is there then the capacity to get a distribution system, which means these crisps can get to market in Scotland to Scottish consumers, etc., etc.? Now, if you do that, you get a process whereby what I describe as the economy grows up together. So we've got an uneven economy where some are so good that the others can't catch up to play with them. I don't mean compete with them, to play with them, to work with them. We need to lift the whole economy up collectively and improve its capacity at all parts. Now that's why I'm critical of Scottish Enterprise's policy of picking 5 or 6 priority areas and focusing on them. The only thing that matters is everything you do. And that's really important. There is no part of the economy which you should not be focusing on. I'm going to give you an example. In the 70s in Scotland and in Norway, I'll pick Sweden, Scotland and Sweden, forestry was a job done by men in lumberjack shirts chopping down trees with axes. In Sweden, they decided that was an inefficient way to go about it. And they invested heavily and supported the innovation of the timber industry. They now have an advanced materials industry which is based in wood, where they can make cross-laminated wooden beams which are as strong, almost as strong as steel. This is a computer-intensive, incredibly high-tech industry with big export capacity. And we're still chopping down trees with big men and axes. That's what happens if you don't support the development of every part of your economy. There isn't a bit of the economy which cannot improve and which will not benefit from improvement. The last thing I'm going to say about analysis, and this one is really important, and in this one in particular, I think the Scottish Government is failing on just now, which is that economic development is not a macro, not a macro issue. It is not a theoretical spreadsheet issue that applies to Scotland as a whole. So it means I was up in Longannet a couple of weeks ago at the launch of the regeneration programme after the power station's been closed down. It means nothing to them to say that you've secured a whole host of call centre jobs in Glasgow. If we do not match economic activity to the places where people live, the economy will fail all by itself. Now, I have family connections to Motherwell, and I can tell you the problem in Motherwell is one industry goes down, and without replacing those jobs, that means that the wealth comes out of that community, so the next business goes down, and then the next one, and the next one. So in Longannet, the first thing that happens is you lose the power plant jobs, just like you lost the coal mining jobs. The next thing that happens is that all the bed and breakfasts where the contractors were staying are now all sitting empty. And the newsagents, where a lot of the people bought their paper in the morning, can't sustain things. And then you find that the people that own the bed and breakfasts can't spend in the local economy, so the grocers starts to close down. And now this process gets to the point where you can't sustain the pub. Now, I know this is going to sound a wee bit narrow, but the pub is a phenomenally important indicator of the economic health of a place. Healthy places have pubs. They have that kind of community resource which people go to. The second you see a pub closing down, you know there's a problem. Pubs are closing down all over Scotland. And it's an indicator of the fact that we don't take place as a key economic indicator. It's managed by Scottish Enterprise in Glasgow on spreadsheets on the basis that, well, you know, on aggregate, the jobs are doing okay. Yeah, because lots of low-paid jobs have aggregated in some places while losing lots of high-paid jobs that have been lost from others. We need to reconnect economics to place. Right, so that was an incredibly, insanely fast rattle through an analysis of some of the things that we should be thinking about to address when we look at our economy. What do we do? Right, number one, we've got to get our finance right. I don't want to go into this extensively just now because there really isn't time. But if you have an interest, just read around a little bit just now in any of the main newspapers, any of the main journals or websites to look at the discussion of what's happening in global capitalism. What's happening around the world. Everywhere now has identified the fact that the financialization of the economy has destroyed the productive economy. So what we've seen over the last 30 or 40 years is a process where banks now make their money through sheer speculation and from a whole bunch of rent-seeking activities. So back in the day, a bank would give you money, it would get the interest on the loan, and that was sufficient. Made it a good solid profit, and it made Edinburgh the safe, solid banking capital of the world. Edinburgh is where you came for solid banking. And then it was deregulated, and suddenly it became very easy to make massively more profits by doing anything apart from serving customers. Finance stopped being something which supported an economy and started being something that made profit all by itself. Now, if you talk to people, they will tell you over and over, anyone that's in business, anyone that's in industry, they will tell you again and again that one of the problems is the nature of borrowing. Not that they can't borrow, and this is a myth that kicks around quite a bit. Oh, there's plenty of loans for small business. Well, yeah, there's plenty of 3-year loans at high interest rates, but that's not what our economy needs. Our economy is very bad at patient investment over 10-year, 20-year, 30-year timeframes. I'm going to come on to housing in a second. You don't want to borrow for house building on a 5-year basis. These are long-term assets. Now, other places support these with banks that do long-term patient lending, enable growth, enable joint. I mean, remember that the bank manager in the day used to be like a partner with the business. If the business went down the tubes, the bank didn't get the money back, therefore the bank manager wanted the business to succeed. And we've just seen the RBS model, which is completely the opposite. The bank gives them a small loan, tries to bankrupt them to take their assets. Now that's a heavily dysfunctional financial system. The first thing that we should do, and we put a detailed proposal together in this. We spent 6 months going through the legal work. We did it jointly with the New Economics Foundation because that's quite technical. The proposal for establishing a Scottish National Investment Bank. And we've got it, it can be done. Scotland could have a Scottish National Investment Bank in collective ownership, which was capable of lending over £10 billion into the Scottish economy in 2 or 3 years' time if we wanted to do it. Now, this is really important. Again, there's so much I'm trying to cover here. There's an awful lot of talk in the Scottish Parliament about that deal with the China Railway Company number 3 falling through and how the debacle it was. The debacle is that we're still taking that as being a beneficial aid to our economy. That money was not going to put more money, that investment by China was not putting more money in our economy, it was taking more money out of our economy. They were going to invest in wind power, which is zero risk and high return. They were going to invest in social housing, which is zero risk and high return. They were going to give us 10 billion to extract lots and lots of wealth from our economy. We can comfortably match every penny that China Railway Company number 3 was going to bring to Scotland from within Scotland. Now, they weren't doing it philanthropically. They were doing it because it benefits them. Why don't we do it so it benefits us? That's what a Scottish National Investment Bank would have done. So the model that we proposed, Scottish National Investment Bank, gives the large lending to local authorities, to the Scottish Government itself, to the large enterprises and big initiatives. And underneath that, we were proposing, quite closely based on the German model, local development banks. So below that level, you have a series of banks whose purpose is not to make profit, but to promote economic development and sustainable economic activity on a local basis. That's the same for the National Investment Bank as a different remit, which incidentally is one of the ways that you can get it past European Union aid laws, is to say, no, it's not a normal bank, it's a bank with a different purpose. And you have those locally. The purpose of these banks is to develop long-term relationships with local business to help them to build and grow. And incidentally, local development banks can become retail banks as well. So you can put your money in. You can keep your cash in a local bank. You don't have to go to RBS. Once again, all legal, can all be done with the powers of the Scottish Parliament. So the next thing I'm going to suggest is that having got a finance system in place, you can immediately do effectively Keynesian stimulation. So there are things that you can do almost straight away, which would create an immediate spike in economic activity. The obvious one is house building. So if you create, again, our proposal, you can do it in a couple of ways. You could do it through the local authorities. We proposed a Scottish National Housing Company, which would borrow, I've got a bit of a cold, so excuse me, which would borrow over 30-year timeframes. Now, if you can borrow over 30-year timeframes, which you can do from a Scottish National Investment Bank, then houses, you can build unlimited housing, or rather housing limited only by people who want to live in it. Now, there's a whole lot of housing talk I can do, but primarily, you could get to a situation where we have, not the 1970s, I'm not a lefty that looks back to the 1970s, I'm a lefty that looks back to the 1950s. We could have a 1950s style where we would have a list, and anybody who wants a first-rate, incredibly well manufactured, high quality, spacious, nicely designed, public sector rental housing could put their name in a list. And however many names were on that list, that's how many you'd build. It's unlimited. The model that we've developed means that the rents, modest, sensible rents, would repay the loan. So this is cost-free. And if you do that properly, if you start to produce large German-style technical house factories where lasers and computers are building entire houses in kits in high quality, you're also doing an important job in pulling the quality of the economy up. You can decide where to put them. You can say we're going to put a house building factory next to Long Annet because we've got an economic development issue there, so let's going to focus some of the work there. You can choose where you're going to stimulate that work. This would be a large number of high-paid jobs, because they're skilled jobs, a large number of high-paid jobs which you could stimulate immediately. And if we did that, we could also change the building and construction industry in Scotland. We built a house a few years ago. Anyone that's built a house, if we could get to a point where, like the Germans, everyone turns up in time, finishes and goes home again in time, that in itself would be pleasant. A side benefit. We can do the same on a number of other areas. So what you're looking for is anything which generates income. Anything that the private sector is investing in, we can invest in, collectively and publicly, and stimulate it now. Obvious one's energy. Now, it's all got a bit messed up because the UK's handling of energy tariffs is a nightmare. And we started doing work on this, and then they changed everything, and we kind of did other things. We need to come back and look at it again. But if you're generating income from solar, from renewable, from any form of renewables, from solar, from wind, from offshore, from tidal, but also from energy storage. I wish I could do my energy storage talk, but I'm not allowed because I've got to get through this. Energy storage is a big deal. We lose an awful lot of renewables because of when they come. If you put storage in, you can double or triple the capacity that you've already got. This is an emerging technology which we can invest in heavily. So not only do we put a new infrastructure of energy in Scotland, but we could become world leaders in modern battery technology, liquid air storage technology, which gives us the capacity to develop an export industry. There are others. I'm going to stop. So, not stop. I'm going to stop that bit. So that's an immediate spike stimulation thing that you could do. So immediately you say we'll boost the economy. All of these have the usual knock-on effects. The next thing, and this one I'm very frustrated about. We spend about £10 billion a year on public procurement. And for reasons which are beyond me, we design it in such a way that Scottish businesses can never get the contract. Now, we've shown the economic benefit in this. We've shown the social benefit in this. We've shown the efficiencies are not bad by doing it this way. But the big corporations really have far too close a relationship with procurement managers. So everybody else in Europe almost everybody else in Europe breaks their contracts down in smaller size to enable domestic industries to compete for those contracts. We package them up into the biggest possible deals. And these deals, there's all sorts of problems with these deals. Like I say, I stay in bigger. They knocked down our primary school because they had an X number of schools construction deal. And it would have been cheaper to have extended the old primary school, which was perfectly fine, a big solid Victorian building, but they didn't have an extension contract, they didn't build a new school contract, so they knocked it down and built another one across the road. And of course that wasn't a Scottish-owned company. You cannot, go out and talk to a producer in Scotland. You cannot make sausages in Scotland and sell them to your local school. It's not doable. You can't supply them. You can't supply bread, you can't supply potatoes, you can't supply food. If you were to decide that you were going to become a major pencil manufacturer, or a pencil manufacturer in Scotland, your chances that you'll be able to sell a pencil to the public sector are slim. So this is easy. Break up big public contracts and spread them. I could explain the legalities of this. European Union law means that you do have to put them out for competitive tender, but if you make them the right size, you favour a different kind of producer, a different kind of contractor to get those contracts. So we can do this straight away, immediately. You can do even more with this if you're clever with procurement policy. Now the SNP did this once and then seemed to lose its flavour for it, which was you can add criteria to contracts which enable you to opt out of competitive tender, particularly if you're doing something advanced or research intensive. So when a CalMac was producing a ferry for the Northern Isles, the Scottish Government said, we want to commission an advanced electric ferry. It's a ferry which doesn't use petrochemical fuels. Because it was a high-tech development and it's had research relevant to the domestic economy, you can put an exemption in. So if you've got a high research and development element to a contract, you can put that in the contract and you can hand contracts to domestic companies. We can use those techniques, not just to direct jobs into our economy, but as a tool for actively saying, for example, why don't we procure our IT in such a way that we're actively building an IT sector in Scotland to support the public sector? It can be advanced technology, it can be open source, it can be whatever we want it to be. We've got to stop seeing public procurement as a big bundle of money where we want to save 5 or 10 pence by getting multinationals to undercut domestic business and start to see it as something that we are using as a crucial tool for injecting money into the economy. Next, other ways to support the smaller business sector, and I'll hopefully have time to come back onto the bigger business sector in a minute. We've just launched, I hope everyone's doing their Christmas shopping in Common Market. I hope you've all seen it. So we've launched commonmarket.scot. We've launched an online retailer for small Scottish producers to enable them to get access to Scottish markets. Because we do quite a bit of policy work with small producers. And they always tell us the same thing. Nobody from the small producer sector has ever said to us, what we want is a 2% reduction in our rates bills. Never once has anyone said that. What they say is we want market access. High streets are colonised by multinationals selling Chinese stuff. Internet is now colonised by a number of big retailers selling Chinese stuff. We can't get to our producers, to our consumers, to our market. We have to link people to market. We have to think about how we help producers get access to Scottish customers. Now, when I was talking earlier on about the extent to which the domination of multinational corporations has distorted parts of the economy, which are not just them, distribution is one of them. We used to have companies which were distribution companies. You could hire a company to distribute your produce to another part of Scotland. John Menzies was one of the biggest of them. So you could say, right, I want to ship this here, and you had a distribution system. But because all the supermarkets have now brought them in-house, and each of them have their own distribution systems, there are no independent distribution systems in Scotland. If you want to get potatoes from one part of Scotland to the other, you're parcel forcing it. Now, that's madness. It's no surprise that people can't get access to markets if that's how we're doing things. We need to think about modern distribution systems. Now, at the small end of things, I could say, come on, Scottish Government, let's tell everybody in the public sector that first port of call for small purchases which don't have to go through competitive tender is a business gateway for Scottish businesses. So just say to them, if you buy light bulbs, go online to a Scottish supplier, perfectly legal, go online to a Scottish supplier website and buy them locally. You can do that, that's a simple thing. At the far end, things are going to change a lot in distribution. As you already know, mail as it was, post as it was, is changing, and we all regularly get big parcel deliveries. Distribution is going to change. Why don't we think about exploring a national distribution system where local authorities are delivering to your house on a reduced cost regularly, 2 days a week? As soon as that happens, suddenly selling your high quality sausages to consumers in your area becomes realistic because you've got a distribution system that supports that. I could talk a lot more about that. I won't. I have to keep moving on, and I'm not going to get on to the rest of the stuff that I want to talk about. But there's other things. Let me talk about, and since it's Friday night, I can do this either apple juice or cider. But it looks at you lot, I'm going to do cider. There were two ways to make cider in the past. You could do a wee guy or woman hand cranking craft cider from a small orchard. It's exhausting, not very productive. Or you could have a massive orchard with a giant big industrial plant juicing all the apples from an orchard. And that was your options. These are no longer our options. You can now have what they call right-sized processing. So you can get an Arctic lorry, with a mobile juicing plant, which can drive to an orchard, juice the entire orchard in a few days, day or two, drive to the next orchard, and the next orchard. Now that principle of right size means that multiple medium-sized manufacturing productive industries can share infrastructure. So we work with a couple of groups who do micro-manufacture, laser cutting, 3D printing, etc., etc. Lots of them can keep advanced machinery going 15% of the week. None of them can keep it going 100% of the week. So why are we not supporting them to come together in public cooperatives of materials of infrastructure to ensure that we've got it for everybody? Now I know that some of these groups have talked to Scottish Enterprise, and Scottish Enterprise say, oh, state aid. If we start building state factories to compete with that state aid, nonsense. You can absolutely do it, particularly if you're doing it as supporting cooperatives. You can absolutely do this kind of thing. It makes the capacity for medium-scale production substantially bigger. And in food in particular, we have a phenomenal food producing country where we still eat crap that's imported, low quality crap that's imported, because we don't support the production and processing crisps. We don't support the production and processing of foods in Scotland for Scottish markets. These are major jumps. Now, I should say, well, if any of this doesn't sound, I haven't even said biotech or microprocessing yet. I should say as well, 70% of an economy is cornflakes. You know, it's just normal stuff. You buy in the shops, the milk, your cornflakes, you go to the garage to get your tyre fixed. That's the vast majority of the economy. Only about 30% of the economy is anywhere near exporting or fancy goods. So all that core stuff is the stuff we never look at. Where do we make our cornflakes? How are our garages supported, independent garages as opposed to, Costco or whatever it is? Are we creating an environment that enables them to survive? And particularly in the high-tech area, one of the things that they always tell us is, it is really easy if you're a multinational corporation to come up with a new product to secure IP protection, to secure all of the asset protection, to get the export supports that enable you to export to another country, because they can have a department that does it for this team, this team there, and this team there. If you're small, you have to buy it bespoke each time individually, and that's very expensive. That's a difficult way to go about handling these things. Once again, there is no reason the public sector couldn't create a unit, hire IP lawyers and export support, and enable lots of smaller suppliers to get together. If you think all of this sounds fanciful, I'm going to encourage you to look at one of Scotland's giant economic success stories of recent years, which is craft brewing. Craft brewing didn't exist barely 10 years ago. That idea of lots of small-scale producers selling high-quality products to local producers didn't exist. And I've become conscious of this as I looked at the economics of it more, and we're also involved in the Scottish Food Coalition, which is doing the same thing but coming from a different direction. I was in York talking to our counterparts, the Yorkshire Party, who's campaigning for autonomy for Yorkshire. They asked me to talk to their annual conference. So I spent the day in York, and I suddenly realised, we have totally different beers in our pubs now than they do. We have Scottish craft beers, and they have Yorkshire craft beers. Now, this is a massive success story. If we can do it with beer, we can do it with other things. And it's also really interesting. I know an economist who did some work on the growth of craft brewers, and he was talking to one supplier and he says, what's the next barrier? What's the next thing? And that supplier says, well, the difficulty we've got now is not just the ability to export, but the ability to sustain it. They were offered a big export deal, but a massive step up for the company. But they would have had to put up a lot of investment in to scale up for this big export order with no guarantees that another one was coming. They can't scale up, scale down, scale up, scale down. So what we have to do is think about developing support for the private sector, from the small, medium-scale, independent private sector, which enables them to deal with ups and downs in market demand for their products, that supports them. There's quite a lot more I could say about small producers. I've become particularly interested in the concept of import substitution. The more that we buy, which isn't imported, the more we're becoming a more sustainable economy. And it's that simple. Right, I'm trying to judge, how much more should I be stopping? 5 minutes. Right, okay, let me then pick up the question of larger scale economic development activities and what we're going to do. This is a big area. If you look at Scotland, there are big successful manufacturers, weir pumps, and there's a number of them, which are doing well, we should be keeping supporting. There are a whole bunch of the other big players which we assume are quite big. You've got banks, and you've got airports now are a big player, and you've got the energy companies. And yet they're not necessarily what you would want as the big players in Scotland if you were designing big players. Now, I know this is being live streamed, and I'm not supposed to talk about them because they're doing so well they can't keep up with demand. But I'm going to say there are models which take things at that scale on, which we could consider developing in Scotland once again to capture more of the economic market in Scotland. So there's an Edinburgh-based initiative company called Our Power. Has anyone heard of Our Power? Oh, they're doing the keep it secret well. Our Power was basically started up as a cooperative between a whole bunch of housing associations. And what they do is they've set up as an energy distribution company. What they do is they offer simplified, flat rates, energy, gas, electricity, directly to the members of those housing associations at a flat rate. It's a non-profit entity. Now, this is a model which would be very interesting, because what we are doing once again is creating a large industry sector which we are keeping in Scotland. We are holding the wealth in Scotland. And incidentally, the thing that stops them from growing as fast as they otherwise would is access to finance. Banks don't finance in a way that enables them to take that kind of a risk. A Scottish National Investment Bank would enable them to scale up, and I could talk about them in public. You can't get your energy, they're oversubscribed. They can't expand fast enough for the demand. We can do things like this. The SNP manifesto had a very vague statement in it about a national energy distribution company. That is a great opportunity. We should be looking at that. We should be looking at emerging. We made, to my opinion, we made an arse of wave power. We did it in a patchy, private sector-y kind of a way. We should have just created a national wave power centre, put our money behind it. And remember, you can build it's harder to nationalise an industry. It's not difficult to start a national industry. We can do these kinds of things. And I think I better stop by saying, now, if all of this sounds like I am in some way saying we've got to do everything in small, patchy, no, we also need to develop big industry sectors. We also need to be aware of the potential for doing the higher end activity in our economy. And I think the last concept that I'm going to leave you with, apart from the fact that we should have an industrial policy which takes everything I've said today and the many things I'm not going to get a chance to say and wraps them up together and says, we are not content to sit back and let things play out as they are. We are going to intervene to shape the economy for the benefit of Scotland, for the benefit of people, for the benefit of places. An industrial policy is something which has now been seriously discussed all over the world. And laissez-faire hasn't worked. Well, it has if you're a big financier. But for countries, laissez-faire hasn't worked. So we need to move towards a better economic development system. I think I'd now frankly get rid of Scottish enterprise. I think I would take local economic development and push it out to the local authorities and say, no, place-based economic development is for local authorities and resource them to do that. Export supports, SDI, and what we do in export support, of course we've got to keep a hold of that, but that could be an entity in itself. Skills development, you'll notice I haven't mentioned skills here. Now, we could do with more STEM people, but the idea that you can have skills-led economic development is now discredited. We've been educating kids out their ears for years, and what do you know? Giving someone a degree doesn't mean there's a job for them. And the idea that there's all these jobs floating out there, and all we needed to do was produce the people, and if we could produce them, suddenly these graduate-shaped holes would all be filled and the economy would go great, is a myth. Labour's still rattling on about this because Labour can't get beyond that. It's wrong. We shouldn't be looking at this idea of a skills-led growth. It doesn't work. But there are many things that we can do. I should have said we've got a report on this. All this stuff's on our website, in the library, allofusfirst.org in the library. We've got a paper called Towards an Industrial Policy that would explain how you would do some of these things. I was going to finish off with, I was about to tell you something. Oh yes, yeah, a concept that I wanted to leave you with. However, we don't want to be a small island. I'm going to say that absolutely the future is localism. Globalization has not worked, hasn't worked. We cannot afford to ship goods all over the world frivolously anymore. The period when Scottish seafood was being frozen, sent, shelled in Hong Kong or East Asia, to be brought back down south, to be packaged and sent back up here, those days are coming to an end. For environmental reasons, for resource reasons, for political reasons, that has to come to an end. So localism and the idea of relocalizing economies is going to be a global solution to global warming and all sorts of other things. But we will always be an international trading species. We're not going to be isolationists. That's not what any of this is about. But let's start exporting on the basis of sustainable quality. The concept that I want to leave on that is the concept of smart specialization. We have now been rattling on for a long time about trying to work out who is there, how do we make them more competitive in international exports. Now, why, oh why, this is not just my peacenik coming true, why oh why we are giving £5 million a year to highly profitable arms manufacturers who are already based in Scotland is a bit beyond me. Why we're giving millions of pounds to Amazon, one of the world's most successful companies, to put a distribution centre into a market which is making them a lot of money, I do not understand. So this idea that to be more competitive, we've got to look at existing players and take away and give them bribes or No, that's not what we should be doing. What we should be doing is asking a simple question. What can we do better than other people? How well can we do it? And how do we compete internationally in that? Smart specialization. This is one of the great successes of the Nordic economies. They don't try to do everything. They don't try to ape big multinational corporations or large economies. They say, we can't make large electric cars all in one, because the running's being made by Volkswagen, by Ford, by so and so and so. But there's a bit of this car, I don't know, I'm just making this up now, but there's a bit of this car, the laser guidance, now that we can do really, really well. We're especially good at this because we're especially smart at this thing. We should specialize at that thing. Don't try to compete on what we're not good at, and compete very aggressively on what we are good at. Now, Scotland in this regard is filled with smarts. We really are. We have great universities. They are putting out very high-skilled people. We need to start to think about reorientating our economic development approach to say, what do we do better than others, and how do we make ourselves do that better, export it well, and develop? And incidentally, one of the interesting answers to that is, it is rare, not unknown, but it is rare to have a sea of mediocrity with one great company popping out of it. Another lesson of the Nordics is what I was talking about earlier on about growing up together. It's when you have clusters, when you have families of strong and innovative. See, I haven't even talked about innovation or productivity. That's really frustrating. Strong, innovative companies which are capable of doing this, growing up together. We have a cluster of optoelectronics doing different specialisms, cluster of biotechs doing different specialisms, cluster of, and of course, Scotland is slipping through our fingers, renewable technologies. We are losing renewable technologies because they're all being developed in this country by importing Chinese wind turbines and sticking them up in our hills and calling that a success story. That is not a success story. So, it's a Friday night. I can't believe you sat through all of this already. There is lots that we can do. Start by getting the infrastructure right, the knowledge right, and the base right. Move on to working out what it is about our economy that's strong, what's weak, how do we fix it, how do we build on it, and then start to take actions, things that you can specifically do immediately. If we do that, there is absolutely no reason that Scotland cannot be what it should be, an absolutely thriving nation, just like the Nordics. And I haven't talked about maritime, and thanks.